The Mongol Empire was an unstoppable force of nature that conquered more territory in 25 years than the Roman Empire did in 400. But Genghis Khan did not achieve this through sheer numbers or superior steel alone. He achieved it through a calculated, mechanical system of psychological and physical terror that turned the human mind into a weapon against itself. The Mongols were master adapters, turning every siege into a clinical experiment in attrition and despair. When they arrived at your gates, they did not just bring horse archers and trebuchets. They brought a predetermined seed of destruction that moved through 5 distinct, terrifying phases. Today, we are breaking down the 5 levels of Mongol terror, moving from the silent, chilling warning of a white tent to the living floor, a victory feast held on top of a carpet of dying men. Hit subscribe to join Legion Lens and see the world through our lens. Level 1, the 3 tents. The psychological countdown. The first level of Mongol terror was not a weapon of war, but a weapon of the mind. It began with a silence so heavy it could be felt from the city battlements. When the Mongol horde, led by commanders like the legendary Subutai, surrounded a target, they did not immediately begin the bombardment. Instead, Genghis Khan would order the pitching of a single brilliant white yurt, the white tent, in full view of the defenders. To the people inside the walls, this was the seed of mercy. The white felt represented the Mongol concept of Suld, or the spirit of peace. It was a clear, non-verbal communication. Surrender now, and you will live. If the city gates opened on that first day, the Mongols would take a portion of the city's wealth and move on, leaving the population largely intact. It was a masterclass in risk mitigation. By offering a peaceful out, the Mongols often captured fortified cities without losing a single horse. However, if the sun set and the gates remained closed, the white tent disappeared. In its place, the Mongols pitched a crimson-red tent. This was level 1.5, the level of blood. The red fabric signaled that the time for total mercy had passed. For the crime of hesitation, the Mongols declared that when the city inevitably fell, every able-bodied man within the walls would be executed. The women and children would be spared, but only to be sold into the massive Mongol slave markets. At this stage, the defenders were no longer fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the slim hope of their family's survival. If the city still refused to break, the red tent was replaced by the final, terrifying black tent. This was the extinction seed. The black tent signaled that the Mongols were no longer interested in tribute or slaves. They were now interested in erasing the city from the face of the earth. From the moment the black felt was raised, the Mongols vowed that every living thing, from the highest-ranking noble to the smallest cat, would be put to the sword. This psychological countdown forced the defenders to sit in the dark for 3 days, watching their own death sentence materialize in the form of a simple tent. Level 2. The KHARASH, the logistics of the human shield. Once the black tent was pitched, the Mongols transitioned to Level 2, the KHARASH system. This was the mechanical terror of Mongol logistics. The Mongols were a horse culture with an elite cavalry, but they lacked the massive infantry numbers required for the meat grinder of a medieval siege. Their solution was to treat the civilian population of the surrounding countryside as a disposable resource. The term KHARASH literally means human shield. The Mongols would round up thousands of local peasants, farmers, and prisoners, forcing them to participate in the destruction of their own regional capitals. These men were not soldiers, they were raw material for the Mongol war machine. Under the threat of Mongol spears, these prisoners were forced to perform the most dangerous tasks of the siege, filling moats with earth, carrying heavy siege ladders to the base of the walls, and operating the trebuchets. But the true horror of the KHARASH was its psychological impact on the defenders. The Mongols would dress these prisoners in Mongol uniforms and drive them toward the city battlements in massive waves. The soldiers on the walls, often looking down through the smoke and dust, would believe they were firing on the Mongol elite. In reality, they were killing their own fathers, brothers, and neighbors who had been captured just days before. This created a traumatic tactical glitch. If the defenders refused to shoot, the KHARASH would reach the walls and the city would fall. If they did shoot, they were committing state-sponsored fratricide. As the defenders exhausted their supplies of arrows, the elite Mongol units would sit back in safety, watching the city's resources and morale wither away. By the time the final assault began, the defenders were too emotionally broken and physically exhausted to resist the fresh Mongol vanguard. Level 3. The Bloodless Law. The Spiritual Paradox. Level 3 represents the spiritual terror of the Mongol conquest. The Mongols lived by a strict legal and spiritual code known as the Yasa, which dictated that the blood of a royal or high-ranking individual was sacred. They believed that if royal blood touched the earth, it would pollute the land and bring catastrophic bad luck to the Khan. This belief led to a terrifying paradox. The more respected you were, the more creative your execution had to be. For enemy kings, princes, and generals, the Mongols invented methods of bloodless execution that were as clinical as they were haunting. They did not use the sword. They used mechanical pressure and physical isolation. One of the most common methods for a defeated noble was to be sewn into a thick, heavy felt rug. The victim would be wrapped tight, the edges stitched together, and then placed in the path of a Mongol cavalry charge. 100 horses would gallop over the bundle, ensuring that every bone in the victim's body was shattered, while the felt rug absorbed every drop of blood. The earth remained clean, but the victim was reduced to a pulp. Other bloodless methods were equally visceral. High-ranking prisoners might have their spines snapped over a wooden beam in a technique that was both silent and final. In other instances, they were cast into massive vats of boiling water, cooked alive until they simply ceased to be. By removing the messiness of the blade, the Mongols turned execution into a quiet, almost bureaucratic procedure. To the surrounding population, it felt as if their leaders had been erased from existence by a higher power, leaving no physical trace of the men who had once ruled them. Level 4. Personalized terror, best exemplified by the fall of the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219. This level was reserved for those who had not just resisted the Khan, but had personally insulted his honor. The victim was a governor named Inalchuq, the ruler of the trade city of Otrar. Inalchuq had made a fatal mistake. He had seized a Mongol trade caravan and executed Genghis Khan's envoys, believing the Khan was a mere barbarian who could be mocked. Genghis Khan's retaliation was a masterclass in mechanical irony. He did not just want Inalchuq dead. He wanted his death to be a technical reflection of his crime. Inalchuq had coveted the wealth of the Mongol caravan, so Genghis decided to give him all the wealth he could ever endure. After a 5-month siege that saw the walls of Otrar pulverized, Inalchuq was captured alive. Because he was a man of high status, the bloodless law applied. The executioners took a crucible of pure silver and heated it until it was a bubbling, viscous liquid, reaching temperatures over 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. As Inalchuq was held down, the molten silver was poured directly into his eyes and ears. This was not just torture. It was a sensory erasure. The silver turned his own desire for wealth into the instrument of his total destruction. The liquid metal cooled and solidified within his skull, sealing his senses in a permanent tomb of precious metal. It was a message sent back to the Khwarezmian Shah that Mongol trade was a fire that could not be quenched, and that those who mocked the Khan's commerce would be consumed by it. Level 5, the living floor, the Kalka River Feast. The final level, the peak of Mongol terror, occurred in 1223, following the Battle of the Kalka River. After Subutai's cavalry crushed a combined force of Russian princes, the Mongols wanted a crimson celebration. The captured princes, including Mstislav of Kiev, were promised that no blood would be shed if they surrendered, a literal and treacherous interpretation of the bloodless law. The Mongols took the captured nobles, laid them side by side on the ground, and placed a massive wooden platform over their living bodies. Then, in a display of systemic brutality, the Mongol generals and their elite guard held their victory feast on top of that platform. As the Mongols ate, drank, and danced, the combined weight of the wood and the hundreds of feasting men above slowly crushed the Russian princes to death. This was the living floor, The victims spent their final hours trapped in the dark, feeling the floorboards press into their lungs and hearing the muffled laughter and the rhythmic thumping of their conquerors' feet directly above them. The act of celebration and the act of execution were merged into a single horrific event. This level of terror was designed to be unforgettable. It was a story that would travel faster than the Mongol army itself, ensuring that every city in the path of the horde would remember the sound of the living floor before the Mongols even reached the horizon.